The spear was planted in frozen ground at dawn. 8 feet of hardened ash, tipped with a blade no thicker than a thumbnail, chipped from flint by hands that had done this 1,000 times before. It was not a weapon anyone would recognize today. It had no metal, no forge. No smith had ever touched it. And yet, before the sun reached its peak, that spear would pass through 4 inches of mammoth hide and find the heart beneath. This is the story of how it happened. This is the story of what it cost. 42,000 years before the first bronze sword was ever cast, the northern edge of Europe was a different world. The Pleistocene epoch had locked the continent under glacial pressure for tens of thousands of years, and the land that is now France and Germany was open. Wind-scoured tundra stretching to the horizon in every direction. Winter lasted 8 months. Summer was a brief, violent greening before the cold returned. The ground never fully thawed. Beneath the thin surface layer of soil and moss, the permafrost went down for hundreds of feet. Cold storage for the bones of everything that had ever died here. The people who lived in this world were fully modern humans. Homo sapiens, no different biologically from anyone alive today. They had language, memory, culture, grief. They buried their dead with ochre and bone beads. They painted horses on cave walls by firelight. They told stories. And they had survived here, on the edge of an ice age, for generations. Not because they were stronger than the animals around them, but because they were smarter, more patient, more willing to plan. A band of 11 adults had been tracking the herd for 3 days. 2 bulls, 4 cows, and a juvenile male barely passed his first winter. 6 tons of muscle and ivory, each one of them. The juvenile was the target, still learning the movements of the herd. Still uncertain, still capable of being separated. The trackers moved at night when they could, using the herd's own noise to mask their approach. Mammoths are loud animals. They rumble and trumpet and crack branches with a sound like falling trees. They generate heat enough to melt snow around their feet. Following them was not the challenge. Getting close without being charged, that was the work. They had no bows. The technology had not yet arrived in this region. What they had were spears, and the throwing sticks, atlatls, that could launch those spears with the force of a drawn bow. They had rope made from twisted plant fiber and strips of hide. They had fire, carried in small clay vessels packed with slow-burning fungus. And they had the accumulated hunting knowledge of every generation that had come before them, passed down in story and demonstration, and the quiet correction of elders watching young hunters practice their throws. The plan required patience. It always required patience. On the second day, they found what they needed. A ravine cut by a frozen river, its banks steep and loose with shale and old snow. The kind of terrain where a running mammoth could lose its footing, where the ground itself could become a weapon. 3 hunters spent the afternoon preparing the approach slope. They loosened the upper crust of ice with stone picks, then poured a thin layer of water over the surface from a carried bladder. By nightfall, the slope was a mirror, invisible in the dark, treacherous to anything large. The remaining hunters split into 2 groups. One group would drive, the other would wait. The drive began before sunrise. The hunters circled wide around the herd, moving upwind for the last quarter mile, and then the noise began. Shouting, branches beaten against the frozen ground. Firebrands swung in wide arcs, throwing orange light across the snow. The mammoths woke to chaos on 3 sides. The herd broke. They always broke. 4 tons of animal running at full speed makes the earth shudder. The juvenile, confused and slow to orient, cut away from the main group exactly as the hunters had hoped, moving along the natural corridor of the ravine bank, funneled by the terrain, running hard. He hit the ice slope at full stride. The fall was catastrophic. 6 tons in motion has nowhere to go but forward. The juvenile went down on his right side, the impact sending a shockwave through the frozen ground that every hunter felt in their feet. He skidded 30 feet down the bank and came to rest against the far wall of the ravine, dazed, one front leg twisted badly beneath him. He tried to rise. The leg buckled. He tried again, failed again. The waiting hunters moved in immediately. This was the most dangerous moment. A grounded mammoth is not a helpless mammoth. Even injured and panicked, the animal could rise at any second and kill. The hunters came from multiple angles, spreading wide, each one presenting the animal with a different threat, dividing its attention, preventing it from committing its full weight in any single direction. The first spear went in behind the right shoulder. The thrower released from 12 feet, the atlatl adding force that drove the flint tip through hide and muscle in a single motion. The mammoth screamed, a sound that did not belong to any modern animal. High and ragged and full of terror, and thrashed sideways, pulling the shaft from the hunter's reach. The second spear found the neck. The third missed, skittering off the curve of the skull and clattering against the ravine wall. The juvenile was bleeding hard now, but still dangerous. One hunter moved too close too quickly and was caught by the motion of the animal's head, thrown backward, landing hard, sitting dazed in the snow with blood running from a cut above his eye. The others did not stop. They could not stop. To stop was to lose everything. 2 more spears, one in the upper flank, one beneath the jaw, angled upward into the soft tissue of the throat.
Still.
The mammoth's breathing
Deep,
changed.
I don't think it hit the bone.
Wet, labored, irregular.
Out here.
His struggles slowed. His legs, still churning mechanically, lost their coordination. It took another 20 minutes before he was still. No one cheered. They stood in the ravine, breathing hard, steam rising from everybody in the frozen air, and they looked at what they had done. The animal was enormous, even in death. His tusks curved out across the snow for 9 feet in each direction. His thick winter coat, matted with blood and ice, was long enough to hide a child inside it. His eye, still open, still catching what remained of the early light, was the size of a fist. The hunter who had been struck sat against a ravine wall with his hands pressed to his head, while one of the women examined the cut. It was deep, but not dangerous. He would carry the scar for the rest of his life. The butchering took the full day and into the night. This was not waste. This was precision. Every part of the animal had a use that had been understood for generations. The hide would become clothing and shelter. The fat would render into fuel. The bones would become tools, needles, frames for structure. The ivory of the tusks would be worked into handles and ornaments, and the carved figures that have survived 40 millennia to be discovered in museum drawers. The meat, packed in snow, would feed the band for weeks. They built their fires at the kill site and slept that night under the open sky, full, warm against each other, with the carcass of the mammoth at their center. The stars above the tundra were sharp and countless, in the way they can only be when no electric light has ever existed within 1,000 miles in any direction. The spear that had found the heart lay in the snow nearby, cleaned and inspected, still functional, ready to be carried forward into whatever came next. No metal, no forge, no technology that any modern person would recognize as sophisticated. Only knowledge, only patience, only the willingness to stand in the cold and face something enormous without flinching. They had eaten. They would survive the winter. In the morning, they would begin the long walk home, carrying as much as they could carry, leaving the rest to the wolves and the ravens and the slow, cold work of time. The footprints they left in the snow were gone by the next snowfall. The bones of the mammoth lasted 40,000 years.
Look at the size of this scapula. It's almost fully intact.
Incredible. We need to be extremely careful with the ice around the edges.